All right, hey everybody.
Hey everyone, hope you can hear us well. We are talking about Tropical Tuesday.
Yeah, it's time for Cloudy with a Chance of Learning, the
Yes.
Tropical Tuesday edition. We're going to be talking all about just different tropical cyclones, what that is, what they're called in different areas, because a lot of them have different names, but it's important to know where they form.
Yep.
Let's jump straight into that, where they form. The places where tropical cyclones form is in an area we know as the tropics. Let me go ahead and actually pull this up on my phone too. I want to make sure I'm answering y'all's questions and seeing them. Let me just pull this up real quick, guys.
Yeah, so we have Cynthia Cook saying hello from Kendall Cook in Bexar County. Hey, Kendall. Glad you're joining us. We have hi from Zaylin in Montgomery and Universal City. We have hi from Ned and Lillian. Judy says someone pushed the button too early. No, these actually start at 1 p.m. each day. We're happy you guys could join us too. So we'll be looking at, you'll be talking about tropical systems and where they actually form. So do you want to dive right into that?
Yeah, so tropical systems form in an area of the world known as the tropics. That's between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And guys, we've talked about this before. Meteorologist Meagan, Massey, and I have talked about how the Earth's tilt plays a role in seasons.
Yes, that's right. So we talk all 4 seasons, and hurricane season is really in those summer months because you have to have the important ingredients, like, for example, warm water, at least 80 degrees. You have to have warm water to at least, kind of fuel those tropical systems.
Yeah, and remember what heats up the water, that's the sun. So we need the sun to be heating things up, and the place where the sun shines more directly on the Earth's surface. Sorry guys, I accidentally hit the audio off. Is right over the equator, all the way up to the Tropic of Cancer and all the way down to the Tropic of Capricorn. So south of the equator, we have the Tropic of Capricorn. North of the equator, we have the Tropic of Cancer. Now those happen to be at 23.5 degrees for both of them. When it's winter time for us here in the northern hemisphere, the Tropic of Capricorn has the sunlight directly over it on the southern hemisphere. And during the summertime here for us in the northern hemisphere, the sunshine happens to be shining on the Tropic of Cancer, which would mean that we have more direct sunlight over the northern part of the hemisphere, causing for warmer water and hurricane season.
And warmer temperatures too, and also that humidity plays a huge role. We have Stacy saying hello from Emma. Hey Emma, glad you could join us today. Holly Thompson, hi from Paisley. I'm in 2nd grade. And Divine and my brother too. So that's great. Happy you guys could join us. Libby says the 4 Boli, hopefully I said that, kids say hi from the far west. NISD in the house.
Nice.
Whoop, there we
Welcome
go.
to all of you. I hope you are all having a wonderful day. So, we talk about hurricanes and how they can have different names. We have tropical cyclones one second, guys. I got to get my dog. Go into what a tropical cyclone is, Megan. How do we have different names for it?
Yeah, so, we talk about the tropical season. So let's kind of dive into what and how tropics form and how these tropical systems form. Well, it all starts with Africa. We have these tropical wave formations. So it has to do with these westerly winds. Sometimes during the summer months, we also talk about the Saharan dust. So this also forms off Africa. We talk about the desert regions and the Saharan dust. If we start getting those westerly winds causing that Sahara dust over our oceans, that could actually limit tropical activity because of the dry air and all the dust particles too.
So something that happens with this tropical wave formation over Africa is we have to have a lot of moisture, causing some showers and storms. That would be over that central portion of Africa as well. And then that will kick off. If there's not a lot of moisture, then you get the drier air, and then that goes over the Atlantic Ocean and that can cause for that Saharan dust and cause for a lower hurricane season. And remember, this is just one place where we're talking about tropical cyclones for forming, because we can have tropical cyclones form in the Pacific Ocean as well, and in the Indian Ocean, and people in different areas call them different things. We call them hurricanes, tropical storms, and then hurricanes. And down in Australia, they call them willy willies. So willy willies is what they call them in Australia. Other parts of the world just call them tropical cyclones. And then in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific, they call them typhoons. And
so all sorts of different names.
Yeah, but they're all known as tropical cyclones.
So Angela wants to know, how does a hurricane start? This is exactly what we're getting into.
Yeah,
right?
this is his whole graphic
for you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you start on this and what you want to say.
So first of all, we'll have a wave, an area of low pressure kind of form over Africa, and that will shift off the coast. And then we end up having these thunderstorms form over the water. Remember, this water is warm. Warm water is like fuel to these hurricanes and tropical systems. Yeah. So think of it like this. You know how you put gas in your car to get it going. If you want your car to go, you have to have gasoline in it. Kids, you may watch your parents pump the gas, and that causes their car to go. Well, these storms, if they don't have warm water, they're not going to go. They need that water. And we have, remember, over the tropical areas, over the equator, over the Tropic of Cancer in the summer, whenever we have the sunlight more directly. Remember, the sun heats the earth. So when the water's warmer, then you can have thunderstorms form. And as we continue along here.
So one thing I want to backtrack on is you talked about an area of low pressure at this point. Remember, Weather Chief Bill Taylor, he talked about the differences between low pressures and high pressures. So you may have to refer to your notes about this, but remember, a low pressure system spins counterclockwise. So you think of an actual clock going from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Well, that's clockwise, but think about that clock going backwards.
Yeah.
That's an area of low pressure. We talked about warmer conditions. That's in the summer. So now, you know, we're over our ocean. You have warm air rising, and that's that low pressure system. And that's what you get, these clouds. So the water vapor cools and condenses. These clouds start to form. That's that low pressure system. So low pressure, lousy weather. High pressure, happy weather. That's the sunshine. So in this state, we are talking about an area of low pressure. So sometimes when meteorologists on TV, National Weather Service to National Hurricane Center, we're talking about these areas of low pressure that form out into the Atlantic and or Pacific Ocean. So this is, you know, around where we live, that's that low pressure system that we're talking about. So this is thunderstorms that form over warm water. Okay, we'll continue.
Oh yeah, and by the way, before we go much further, I want to give a shout out to somebody here.
Okay.
So Tony Rodriguez, I was his mentor over the summer.
Okay.
And these are actually the graphics that he built.
Very nice.
So he did a lot of hard work on this mentorship program that we were doing through his high school. And I just want to give a shout out to Tony Rodriguez. He did a phenomenal job building these graphics. Unfortunately, his end goal was to present these, but right now, because of the current situation, he hasn't been able to. He's going to be presenting these, though, for his senior project eventually, and I can't wait for him to get to do it. And I'm excited to be able to show off some of the graphics that he's built here as we head throughout these next few weeks. We're going to be showing some of his graphics every once in a while. So
that's
great
awesome.
work, Tony.
Nice, Tony. Thanks for the graphic, too. So this is a major shout out to you. He's our graphics guru for today.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, so let's continue to go. So we have these thunderstorms and this cloud cover that form over the warm water, right?
Yeah, and now, so these systems, they move from east to west because of where they are in the planet. Some areas, we have storm systems go west to east. But down here in this part of the world, these storm systems are going east to west.
So this is important. You know, we talked about Severe Weather 101, knowing your county and knowing what city you live in. That's important. Now let's talk about direction. I want you to write down, and parents can also help with this too. Talk about the difference between north, east, south, and west. It is so important to know directions. Let me tell you, that's one thing that you carry on with life, right?
Yeah.
That is one thing you just have to know, is when things go from west to east, east to west, north to south, south to north. Know that, and that's going to help you a lot, not only with weather, but also directions to get somewhere in the future. Just so important to know your directions too.
Yeah, remember, there's an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. This is why directions are so important.
Yes.
Patrick had a compass, and Mr. Krabs, I believe it was,
I love
said,
this episode. He said east. I thought you meant west, and he said west. What kind of compass are you reading, lad? And he's like, that's west, Patrick.
Exactly.
I know all of the, yeah.
If you go the wrong direction, it could be pretty serious. So remember, knowing your directions is always very important.
I love SpongeBob, by the way.
Oh yeah. So as these storms continue to move west across the Atlantic, a storm could get more organized and start to rotate. So this could be when we have something called a tropical depression form. This is just a tropical depression. Think of it this way. A cluster of thunderstorms that are intensifying, or just a stronger cluster of thunderstorms with some gusty winds. But as the system continues to move along, you'll notice that the storm could start to rotate more and more and more, and then once it has wind speed, we can start to classify this as a tropical storm.
So let's talk about one big weather term, and that is wind shear. So how does wind shear play a huge role in tropical activity development?
Well, wind shear can cause a storm to kind of get ripped apart. Think of it this way. Think as if you had really fast winds up high and then they get slower down to the surface. That could cause a system to lean a little bit. Now, in the tropics, remember when you spin your tops, how they stand up straight up and down? That's what you want a tropical system to do if you wanted it to intensify. That's if we didn't have wind shear. If we didn't have those faster winds up high, the top would, the storm would spin and be healthy. But let's say we have the winds faster up high, and the storm would not spin. So think of it like this. When you spin a top, it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and it's standing up perfectly straight, just how you want it to. But let's say then you thump it with your finger, and then the top kind of spins out and just kind of wipes out. That would be if we had wind shear. That thump with your finger would be wind shear, and it would mess it up. But if we didn't have wind shear, we'd just keep spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. Kind of like that.
Okay, so let's continue on. So we have, once the system has 39 miles per hour, that becomes a tropical storm. So maximum sustained winds, correct?
Right. So you can classify it as a tropical storm once it has sustained winds of 39 miles per hour. But as the storm continues to intensify, it could become a hurricane. Not all storms become hurricanes, but if it has that really warm water, remember that fuel, if it continues to get that really warm water, it could intensify and become a hurricane with 74 mile per hour sustained winds.
And so wind shear still plays a huge role into this, because wind shear could also change while this, system goes from a depression to a tropical storm and then a hurricane. Wind shear can fluctuate, and sometimes if the wind shear is very high, it could rip up that hurricane, and maybe it won't get from a tropical storm to a hurricane. Maybe it'll just kind of fizzle out a little bit and just produce heavy rain along the East Coast, for this example.
Yeah.
So that's something we often look at as far as, behind the scenes with tropical forecasting. As one big thing we look at is wind shear, sea surface temperatures, temperatures in the atmosphere, just all sorts of different things. What would you say that a few more forecast tips that you would give with tropics?
It gets tricky with forecasting for the tropics.
It definitely does.
You don't have as many sensors. On land, we have so many sensors that tell us what's going on, but over the water, there's not as much. We have a few satellites that give us some information. We have a few buoys that tell us some things, but those buoys are really far away from each other. So you have hurricane hunters that go out there and fly the storms. They fly directly into the eye, and that's going to be a topic for another week. But they fly directly into the eye to gather data, and it's pretty fascinating. I actually got to fly with hurricane hunters, the Air Force hurricane hunters. There's two different groups. You have NOAA that flies in a P3, and a P3 is an aircraft, a large aircraft that flies into these storms and gathers data down low. NOAA, they're known as NOAA Core. They also fly up high above the storm in a G4, which is a Gulfstream, and that is a jet. So a jet that's up high, but a propeller plane flies low and gathers data and has all sorts of weather instruments on the wings. Now the Air Force also flies these storms. They're known as the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. And they fly C-130Js.
And we actually have a dropsonde, one of the instruments, in the KINS 5 studio. But of course, we're at home, so we don't have the dropsonde on us. Man, that would have been great to show, too, on camera.
Oh, yeah, that would have been a lot of fun. And we may go pick it up, and that way we can talk about that for that part of the lesson. That's going to be in a few weeks, though. We're going to talk more about hurricane hunters and the people who fly into these
instruments they use. So you would say a dropsonde is kind of similar to a weather balloon with forecasting severe weather with a weather balloon launch, you know, sending those balloons with a radio sound attached to it well into our atmosphere to gather temperature, wind speed, wind direction, humidity, so much more data that we find useful in severe weather. But you would say a dropsonde is pretty similar to that, but for a hurricane.
Yeah, and one of the things that these dropsondes gather, they help us categorize a storm to another level typically. Those dropsondes will gather this wind data.
So this is perfect for our next graphic.
Exactly, in the Saffir-Simpson scale. This is how we qualify different kinds of storms. This is how we rate them, rather, for hurricanes. So the Saffir-Simpson scale is the different levels of hurricanes. 74 to 95 mile per hour winds, that's our wind speed, would categorize the storm as a Category 1 hurricane. And that can typically cause some damage. It really depends on where you are. Sometimes the damage could be more severe with a Category 1, even if it's just even if it's just a weaker storm. But as you go up the scale, you're going to notice the wind speeds pick up and the damage can be larger. A Category 2, 96 to 110 mile per hour winds, very quick. That's extensive damage. And then when we get to Category 3 and higher, we can categorize it as a major hurricane. 111 to 129 mile per hour winds can be devastating with a Category 3 storm. Category 4, 130 to 156 mile per hour winds can be catastrophic. And then 157 plus mile per hour winds can be catastrophic as well. And you know, we talk about Category 4 and 5 storms. Again, I just told you that it gets a lot worse whenever you get higher. But remember, weaker storms can be just as bad or worse for some areas if it instead landed somewhere else.
So here's a good thing that, you know, the kids could be picked up on, and maybe this is in one of Bill Taylor's quizzes. What category does a hurricane become a major hurricane? And the answer is a Category 3 with winds over 111 miles per hour.
Yeah.
So we definitely rate our hurricanes based off wind speed. Similar to tornadoes, but tornadoes aren't really real time. It's always the damage after the tornado has occurred. So that's the biggest difference between, you know, on a smaller scale, a tornado versus a very large scale hurricane. But something to also notice, and we always stress this during hurricane season, pay attention to impacts way more than category strength.
Yeah, and that goes back to where it ends up landing, because different impacts can be for different areas.
Right, so impacts can include storm surge, it can include wind gusts, it could include severe weather threats on the outer bands. Sometimes we could get those brief spin-up tornadoes. Sometimes areas could have a severe thunderstorm watch or tornado watch, and even many tropical storm watches and or warnings in place. So it's so important to pay attention to the little impacts versus the larger picture, if that makes sense. So, you know, let's say even though it's a Category 1 hurricane, still pay attention to the impacts that, you know, local meteorologists will talk about. That's just so important to stress, so you have that proper action plan in place.
Yeah, and you know, I wanted to bounce it back to the impacts in the area. The most costly storm to ever hit the United States was Hurricane Katrina. And Hurricane Katrina was only a Category 3 at landfall. So now the deadliest hurricane to ever hit the U.S. was the 1900 hurricane, which hit Galveston Island, which is right here in Texas, near Houston. We're going to talk more about that hurricane in a few weeks. We're going to talk about the history of some of the largest hurricanes to hit here in Texas. Yeah. But the costliest hurricane to ever hit the United States was Hurricane Katrina, only a Cat 3 at landfall. Now, at its peak intensity, when it was still over water, Katrina did become a Category 5. But by landfall, it was only a Category 3. And it did all that damage because the area that it hit is more of a risk for storm surge. And again, I'm talking about lessons in the future. We're going to be talking more about impacts here in a couple weeks.
So let's talk about impacts too. So let's give an example that hit close to home, and that would be Hurricane Harvey. Now, Hurricane Harvey, I was still a broadcast meteorologist, but I was in the Waco Temple area right along the I-35 corridor. So that's sandwiched right in between Dallas and Austin. Now, the one thing about Harvey's major impact when it made landfall is it was sandwiched in between two high-pressure systems. So Harvey didn't really go anywhere. It just kind of sat over, you know, the Gulf Coast area for long periods of time, aka Houston, and just dumped all that rainfall, which caused catastrophic flooding. That's a big impact that you have to watch out for, especially since we live in a flood-prone area. You know, San Antonio could also see flooding from hurricanes since we're not too far from the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, and I can't remember what the storm's name was. It was 98, I believe, and a tropical system. I think it was just a tropical storm. I can't remember. You guys, you'll have to excuse me. I've done a little bit of research on tropical systems in this area, but a tropical system had come west, and it caused some major flooding on some rivers. That's one of those instances whenever we talk about tropical systems that could shift west and cause massive flooding. It's impacted this area before. Inland flooding is a big issue. Again, we're going to talk more about that stuff in a couple weeks.
Were you talking about Francis by chance?
I think it was Francis.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know my mom, she grew up in the Houston area, and she talked to me about hurricanes that she's lived through. And a lot of them she would actually stay hunkered down at home for, and she would just stay sheltered during this hurricane. So my mom has some fascinating stories. I should get her to share a story on one of our Fun Fridays, honestly.
Yeah, maybe we can get her to do that. You know, we want to bounce it forward, though. Let's go ahead. We've talked about wind speeds.
Yep.
When are these more likely? Frequency. That's a word that some of the kids out there, you may not have heard. That means how frequent, how often does something happen? Is it more common? Does it happen a lot, or does it happen a little? So here we're looking at a graph. And for those who may not know graphs as well, I'm talking to some of the really younger audience out there. Look at the left side of the graph. We're talking about around May, and then we're going all the way through December, which is on the right side. So a timeline from left to right, and then we're talking about the number of storms per 100 years going from the bottom of the screen to the top. So the start of hurricane season is June 1st. That is when hurricane season begins. The peak is September 10th. So that would be whenever we're really warm. That's when that sunlight is coming closer to the Tropic of Cancer, which is, remember, 23.5 degrees north of the equator, our part of the world, or getting closer to our part of the world, rather, not necessarily our part, but getting closer. And that means that the sunlight is more directly over the ocean on the northern hemisphere. So that allows the water to warm up, and notice that the water stays warm all the way through September 10th, allowing for that heating, and then it doesn't really cool off until we get closer towards November 30th when hurricane season ends.
So we know about hurricane season. So remember that the season starts on June 1st. We know the season peaks on September 10th, and then the season starts to dwindle down by November 30th. So these are a few notes you may want to write down and just jot down, and make sure to always have that preparedness plan in place before hurricane season strikes. So this is typically when it gets a little more active. Now, one key thing to note is, even though a tropical season forecast may come out from the National Hurricane Center or researchers, and let's say it says an above average hurricane season, keep in mind it doesn't mean that all hurricanes or tropical storms will make landfall. Some of them could be just totally out in open waters and then just kind of die off from there. So even though forecasters will say, hey, it's an above average hurricane season based off this data and this research that we've put together, just know it doesn't mean every single storm will make landfall. I know we've had a few people talk about Hurricane Harvey. They said, what was the category of Harvey? The correct answer is a category 4 before it made landfall on the Texas coast. It set over Houston for about 4 days and dropped over 60 inches of rainfall in some spots.
Yeah, and we have a few other questions coming in here. I see Roxana says, Andrew in Dallas has a question of, has a hurricane come on land and become a tornado? And now the answer to that, Andrew, is no. So the thing is, a hurricane and a tornado, they form in two very different kinds of ways. But something that we do have as a threat with hurricanes is that a hurricane can cause tornadoes to form. When I was working in Biloxi, Mississippi, I believe it was Tropical Storm Cindy made landfall all the way over in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is well far away from where I was in Mississippi. It was a good maybe 200 miles, I think.
And it was west, so it goes back to that direction, and it's so important to know the difference between west and east.
And we had bands, rain bands and storm bands from Cindy coming up over our area where we were at. And it actually caused a lot of tornadoes over our area. And we had a lot of damage to homes and trees, and even cars were flipped over. And that was all from tornadoes caused by a tropical cyclone. It wasn't a hurricane, it was a tropical storm. So remember, that means that the winds were between 39 to 73 miles per hour. 74 mile per hour winds and up classifies the system as a hurricane. But great question, Andrew. Thank you.
So can hurricanes bring lightning and hail when they hit? Yes, they can. It all depends on just the storms that make up that hurricane. We were talking about, I'm actually going to go back a graphic because we're talking about how they form here. You know how it all starts with the tropical wave formation. So we start with those westerly winds, and then thunderstorms form over water. So you have these thunderstorms kind of coming together in this low pressure system. So think of those thunderstorms. Average thunderstorms, sometimes they have hail. Sometimes they produce hail depending on the strength. Now, with most tropical systems, these thunderstorms are already strong enough, so I could definitely see a lot of them being hail producers.
Yeah, very possible, especially when you have that strong updraft. Remember the rising air. We talked about updrafts and downdrafts with thunderstorms. So the air is rising really fast, and you have cold air at the top of the atmosphere, and the water is rising up. It could cause hail to form. Now, I see a great question here. And it looks like there's some hurricanes came before the season. Why is that? Yeah, you can still get hurricanes to occur before the season even begins, or even after the season's over. It's very possible. It's not as likely, but it's possible. And that's because the water can still be very warm at times. Sometimes you have a warm winter, the water will still be warm out there in the Atlantic, and you can have some tropical cyclones form, but not as common.
Right, so it really just all depends on our ingredients. Looking at peak season, September 10th, we've already been warm for quite some time now. So we talked about the warm water being fuel. We've talked about the summer months kind of being the fuel. The humidity, above normal temperatures, things like that, really warm sea surface temperatures, at least 80 degrees or above. that's going to be the prime, hurricane waters. So it just really depends on all of the ingredients in place, Susan. So that's why some of them form before and after.
And I will say that the ones that typically occur before June or June 1st or after November 30th, they're typically out over the water, way out there, and they don't typically impact the land. They're not saying that it can't happen. It's still possible for them to impact land, but those are typically way out there, and they're typically short-lived, because when we head into the winter months, we typically get more shear over the Atlantic. And remember, shear is bad for hurricanes. They don't want to be thumped. They don't want to be that top that's thumped. They want to be a top that spins perfectly up and down and continue to go and go and go. But if there's a lot of shear, it will be bad for the hurricanes, but good for us because we don't want these, right?
So Autumn wants to know, and by the way, I love that name, how long do hurricanes last?
They can last anywhere from, you could even say 24 hours to even days. There have been hurricanes that will sit out over the Atlantic Ocean, and as long as they don't move over land, because remember, land doesn't have warm water. The fuel is warm water. So even if the land is warm, it doesn't work. They need moisture, which is in the oceans. If it's over land, the storm is going to fall apart and die. So these storms need this fuel. But as long as they don't go over land and they don't leave warm water, these storms can last for days. There was one when I was in college, and we called them fish storms, the ones that never impact land, because all they do is dizzy up the fish. The fish get dizzy, you could say. It's just a little joke. Fish don't necessarily get dizzy, but just a fish storm. So it just kept doing loops out in the Atlantic and just kept going, never impacted land, but it was out there for days. It may have even been like a week or two, but that's not uncommon. That's very possible as long as the water is warm, there is no shear, and the storm doesn't go over land, which could really impact it.
So I know Jennifer says, do hurricanes stay 4 months, question mark. So I'm going to let you answer that one.
I don't know if there's ever been one that's been out there for more than a month, but again, it's possible.
Yeah.
So I can't think of an instance myself, but I'm not saying it's not possible. As long as it's just over warm water the entire time and no shear, it's possible, Jennifer.
So, do you see any more questions?
I see, do hurricanes hurt sea life? And the answer is they could if they're moving on shore. So that could cause fish to when there's storm surge, the fish could be left on land and then the water goes back out, and then that could hurt the fish. But typically, if it's just staying over water the whole time, the wildlife would be fine. Sometimes birds get stuck in the center in the eye, which I'm going to get a little technical here. The eye in the center of the storm has high pressure up high. So think of it this way: low pressure, the winds come in, and then they go up. The rising air, the low pressure rising air. Imagine that there's a little ceiling up here in the top of the atmosphere. And the winds can't go up any higher. And they're all coming to the center, but they can't go anywhere because there's a ceiling here. They can't go up any higher. So if a storm's really strong, that wind will push up against that ceiling, and then that will cause, because there's nowhere else to go, they'll go straight down. The air will go down. And remember, sinking air, we're talking high pressure. So that will cause the sinking air, and there will be no clouds, and it will be calm, and it will be clear. And that's why in the eye of a hurricane, it's calm, and you can look up and see blue sky. So pretty cool stuff there, but sometimes that area of the storm could be where birds go, and they'll fly around if they get stuck in the storm. So it can impact birds. I will say, sometimes the wildlife, though, can get on land. The marine life, the water will push the fish on shore with the surge, but most of the fish end up making it back into the ocean. they'll just follow the water back out. And actually, with Katrina in Biloxi, Mississippi, there were dolphins with an aquarium. The water came up over the dolphin tank because it was a 28-foot storm surge, the largest storm surge to ever hit the U.S. Again, we're going to talk more about that kind of stuff in a few weeks, but it was the largest storm surge. The storm surge went above the dolphin tank. All the dolphins got out. The dolphin tank got absolutely destroyed in the hurricane, but all the dolphins survived, and they were found days later in the Gulf of Mexico. They came up to a research vessel, and all those dolphins were taken to Atlantis in the Bahamas. It's a big resort place, and those dolphins are the Katrina dolphins now. So typically, that's one of the instances where the animals can make it back in the water. They just follow the surge back, the storm surge, whenever it retreats back to the ocean.
Very interesting
stuff. I've got a lot of fun facts about tropical systems. I can't wait to share them with y'all every Tuesday. And we're going to get so technical and fun, and we're going to make it in a way that y'all can understand. Don't worry.
And Ellie sends a dolphin emoji.
Yeah, my sister, who, by the way, we were in the Jackson, Mississippi area during Katrina, and I believe it was a Cat 1 when it went over our area. We didn't have power for a bit. A lot of people will tell you, we'll talk about things after hurricanes too. It's really hot, and there was no way to cool off. The power was out, and it was hot. So the heat after a hurricane, and just some things that people deal with after storms. We'll talk about that too.
So it's always important to have that preparedness plan in place before the season starts on June 1st.
Yeah, so we'll have all sorts of stuff to share with you. We're going to talk more about the tropics next Tuesday, but let's talk about what we're going to talk about tomorrow, which meteorologist Paul Morales is going to be in, and he's got a fun topic to talk about.
Yeah, so he'll be talking about the convective process, all about fronts on Thursday. We're talking about a warm front, an occluded front, a stationary front, cold front, a dry line, you name it. We'll be talking about that. And of course, on Friday, we have our Fun Time Fridays where we share your pictures and your stories. So if you took notes today, make sure to share that with the hashtag KINS5Eyewitness on social media, or you can email us. My email is mmassey@kins5.com. You can also send it to Andrew Wilson. He has an email as well.
Yes, it's awilson@kins5.com.
Yeah, so send us the pictures of the notes. We'd love to see them, and we'll send them to Bill. He'll be covering Friday.
And I will be as well. I'll be on as well from home right here. Yeah,
so you'll be on Friday too, here at home.
Yeah, so guys, that's it for now. I hope you all had a great time learning about the tropics. Guys, I've got a lot of passion for tropical meteorology, and I can't wait to share more about it with you over these next few weeks. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the impacts from a hurricane. What impacts are felt for coastal areas? What impacts can be felt inland from a hurricane?
The worst part of a hurricane, or the worst side to be on.
Yeah, and then in about 2 weeks, we're going to talk more about some historical hurricanes that have hit Texas. Again, the deadliest hurricane to ever hit the U.S. hit Galveston in 1900. And we're going to talk a little bit about that storm as well.
So let's talk about a few review questions. I would say the first thing to know is the difference between north, east, south, and west. That's the first thing. Know the first day, the peak, and the last day of hurricane season. So know those 3 dates. Also, another thing, how do hurricanes start? You know, what's the number 1 process we showed you in that formation graphic? And then let's talk about winds. You know, what maximum sustained wind speeds does a tropical system have to have in order to be a tropical storm, and then bump it up to a Category 1 hurricane? So know the differences in wind speeds there.
Yeah. So
anything else you want to add?
That's about it, guys. I hope you can tune in again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the convective process with meteorologist Paul Morales. And I hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to continue to practice that social distancing, looking outside, a little bit of a breeze. We've got a lot of cloud cover, a very slight chance for rain today, but if you can get out of the backyard and run around a little bit, of course with permission from your parents, it's going to be a great day to do that.
Get up and move in a little bit. dancing out in your living room or something.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. I did that yesterday and it was awesome.
There you go. So y'all have a great one. And we'll, of course, have another Cloudy with a Chance of Learning tomorrow
Yes.
at 1 p.m.
See y'all later.